Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Business English Podcast, the podcast specifically tailored for non-native professionals striving to enhance their English communication skills in a business environment. I'm your host, Rob, and I'm thrilled to guide you on this exciting linguistic journey today. Today's episode is an especially important one: expressing sincerity in business English. Sincerity, what does that actually mean to you? We all know it's a virtue and an attribute much admired in personal relationships. But when it comes to business interactions, how does it play out? And more importantly, how can we communicate it effectively, particularly when using a language that's not our mother tongue? In business, the way we express our thoughts and feelings can greatly influence the dynamics of our professional relationships, as I'm sure we'll all agree. A genuine interaction could pave the way to a trustworthy business partnership or a successful negotiation. Hence, today, we're going to delve into the nuances of expressing sincerity in the language of business. English. See what I did there? Whether you are delivering a presentation, attending a networking event, writing an email to a colleague, or negotiating a deal, expressing sincerity in your communication can strengthen your personal image and credibility. But as non-native English speakers, we can sometimes struggle to express this authenticity due to language barriers or cultural differences. And of course, today we are here to help. Throughout this episode, we'll define sincerity in a business context, give examples of phrases you can use, and provide guidance on verbal and non-verbal cues to watch out for. We'll also address how to avoid common mistakes when trying to sound sincere in English. So, by the end of this episode, you'll have a full and gleaming toolkit to help you communicate your intentions with sincerity, fostering trust and openness in your business interactions. So, as ever, sit back, relax, recharge those coffee cups, and turn to page 1 of our hymn sheet, ready for our first number. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business English Podcast, helping professionals communicate more effectively, more confidently, and with impact. With your host, Rob, from Energetic English. Let's get down to business. Right, let's get started by building a foundation. What exactly do we mean by sincerity in a business context? Well, essentially, sincerity involves conveying your thoughts, feelings, and intentions honestly and without pretense. It's about being genuine, true, and authentic in your communications. But in the realm of business, it's more than just honesty. It's about building trust. The trust that you generate through sincerity is the very bedrock of all successful business relationships. When you're sincere, people are more likely to believe you and your business. And this belief can lead to stronger connections, better cooperation, and ultimately successful business outcomes. But expressing sincerity isn't always straightforward, particularly when you're dealing with a language that isn't your own. And this is the challenge that we're addressing today. How can non-native English speakers master the art of expressing sincerity in business English? Now, it's crucial to understand that sincerity isn't about just the words that you're using. Yes, your vocabulary plays a role, but sincerity also comes across through your tone of voice, your body language, and the context in which you're communicating. So, it's not enough to learn a few phrases or expressions. You need to understand how to use them in a way that genuinely communicates your sincerity. Another important aspect we need to touch upon is cultural differences. Different cultures have different norms and expectations when it comes to sincerity. For example, in some cultures, directness is valued and seen as sincere, whilst in others, subtlety and indirectness are considered more respectful and genuine. As a non-native English speaker, understanding these cultural nuances can be instrumental in successfully communicating your sincerity. So, what we're looking at here is a multifaceted concept, or as I like to call it, a challenge. It's not just about saying the right things, but saying them in the right way, and understanding how your words might be received based on cultural context. In the next section, we're going to go further down that rabbit hole and look at some common English expressions used to convey sincerity and explore how to use them more effectively in various business scenarios. So let's get started. So, we've built our foundation on understanding what sincerity means in a business context. And now we're ready to get into the nitty-gritty. How can we express sincerity using common English expressions? Now, of course, there are many phrases in English that are often used to convey sincerity, but here are 4 great ones to get us started. 1. I sincerely believe. I sincerely believe. 2. I genuinely feel. I genuinely feel. 3. In all honesty. In all honesty. 4. To be perfectly frank. To be perfectly frank. These expressions can be powerful tools in your business English arsenal, but they need to be used correctly to be effective. For instance, if you're giving a presentation and you want to express a strong belief in your project, you might say, I truly believe that our strategy will yield excellent results. Here, I truly believe emphasizes your sincerity and your commitment to the strategy. Or perhaps you're in a meeting and need to give feedback. You could start with, honestly, I think we could improve our performance in this area. Honestly, in this context, signifies that you are giving an earnest opinion. That's earnest, not honest. And this can encourage others to take our feedback seriously. However, it's vital to remember that these expressions should be used genuinely and sparingly. Overusing them can dilute their impact and may even lead people to question your sincerity. After all, if everything you say is prefaced with, honestly, people may begin to wonder why you need to constantly affirm your honesty. Moreover, using these expressions inappropriately can also lead to skepticism. For example, if you're offering criticism starting with, to be perfectly frank, might come off as blunt or even harsh. It's always essential to consider your context and the audience before choosing your words. Remember, our goal is to communicate sincerity in a way that strengthens our professional relationships. This means being mindful not only of what we're saying, but how we're saying it. Always aim for your words to reflect your genuine thoughts and feelings, and avoid empty phrases that might be perceived as insincere. In our next section, we'll be delving into the realm of verbal and non-verbal communication, my favourite, and how it can influence our ability to express sincerity. Let's take a look. Now, before jumping into the next section, I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know that if you wanted to get more out of the Business English podcast, then that is possible. For example, full transcripts complete with timestamps so you never miss an expression, phrase-focused one-pagers to quickly refresh your memory before that next last-minute meeting, pronunciation support to assist with the trickier elements of business English, live read-along transcripts, quizzes, and much more. If this sounds like it could be useful, then the Business English Podcast Premium subscription could be for you. Check out the details at the link in the show notes. Right, on with the show. Okay then, now that we've talked about what sincerity means in business and some common expressions to convey sincerity, now let's move on to another really important aspect, the role of verbal and non-verbal cues in expressing sincerity. Now, you might be thinking, I've got the words down, isn't that enough? Well, it's a good start, but there's more to communication than just words, as I'm sure you're very much aware. In fact, many studies suggest that a significant part of our communication is non-verbal. So, while your words are important, how you deliver them can significantly impact your message's sincerity. Let's start with verbal cues. This refers to elements like your tone of voice, inflection, and the speed and volume at which you speak. All of these can play a role in expressing sincerity. For instance, a soft, steady tone can convey sincerity when expressing sympathy or understanding. Conversely, a firm and assertive tone may communicate sincerity when you're standing your ground on a particular issue. Then we have non-verbal cues, which encompass things like body language, facial expressions, and eye contact. For example, maintaining eye contact when you're speaking to someone can signal that you're genuinely engaged and sincere in your communication. Similarly, nodding in agreement or leaning in slightly while listening to someone can show that you're truly invested in what they're saying, further emphasizing your sincerity. But here's the catch. Different cultures interpret these cues differently. What a nightmare. What's seen as a sign of sincerity in one culture might be considered rude or insincere in another. As a non-native English speaker, it's crucial to be aware of these cultural nuances to effectively communicate your sincerity. Let's take eye contact, for example. In Western cultures, eye contact is typically seen as a sign of sincerity and engagement. However, in some Eastern cultures, too much eye contact can be viewed as confrontational or disrespectful. So the key here is to understand the culture you're interacting with and adjust your nonverbal cues accordingly to effectively communicate your sincerity. In the next section, we'll explore how to convey sincerity in written communication, an equally important aspect of business interaction, as I'm sure you'll agree. Right, in the last section, we discussed verbal and non-verbal cues to convey sincerity, which are crucial for face-to-face interactions. However, in our increasingly digital world, written communication is equally, if not more, important. So, how can we express sincerity in our written business communications? Written communication, whether it's a quick email, a detailed report, or an official letter, presents its own unique challenges and opportunities. Unlike verbal communication, we don't have the advantage of tone of voice or body language to convey our sincerity. Instead, we have to rely on our choice of words, the structure of our sentences, and the overall tone of our communication. To start with, your choice of words plays a crucial role in expressing sincerity. Similar to verbal communication, using phrases that show sincerity like I sincerely appreciate, I truly believe, in all honesty, can be helpful. However, remember that these phrases should be used sparingly and genuinely to avoid sounding contrived or insincere. Sentence structure also plays a role in conveying sincerity, as I've previously said. Generally, clear and straightforward sentences are more likely to be perceived as sincere. If your sentences are overly complex or convoluted, they may come across as evasive, which could raise questions about your sincerity. Finally, the overall tone of your written communication can signal sincerity too. A polite, respectful tone is generally perceived as sincere. On the other hand, an overly formal or stiff tone might come across as insincere or unauthentic. It's all about finding the right balance between professionalism and authenticity. But remember, as with verbal communication, cultural nuances also apply to written communication. Different cultures might have different expectations and norms when it comes to written communication, so be sure to keep that in mind too. Now, in the next section, we'll discuss these cultural nuances in a bit more detail and highlight some common pitfalls to avoid when expressing sincerity in business English. Let's do it! Right, up until now we have explored how to convey sincerity through verbal and written communication. Now let's get amongst cultural nuances and common pitfalls to avoid when expressing sincerity in business English. Now, as we have mentioned throughout this episode, cultural differences can greatly influence how our attempts at sincerity are received. Expressions of sincerity can vary from culture to culture, and what may be considered sincere in one culture may potentially be perceived differently in another. For example, in many Western cultures, being direct and explicit is often seen as sincere. In contrast, many Eastern cultures value a more indirect and nuanced approach, where sincerity is often expressed more subtly. Another point to consider is the level of formality. Some cultures may associate sincerity with a more formal style of communication, while others may view informal, friendly communication as more genuine. As a non-native English speaker, being aware of these cultural nuances can help you better navigate different business environments. So, what are some common pitfalls to avoid? One mistake is overusing sincerity expressions. As we've mentioned earlier, expressions like honestly, sincerely, or truly can help convey sincerity, but if overused, they may have the opposite effect. Another common mistake is not aligning your non-verbal cues with your verbal communication. For example, if you're saying something sincere, but your body language suggests discomfort or indifference, your message may not come across as genuine. And of course, if you haven't picked up on the vibe already, another pitfall here is not taking into account cultural differences. What's considered sincere in your own culture may not be viewed the same way in another, so always be aware of the cultural context you're operating in. And finally, remember that sincerity is not just about the right words or actions, it's about being genuine, authentic, and true to your word. And here we are, we have reached the final section of today's episode on expressing sincerity in business English. What an insightful journey it has been, I must say. So let's quickly wrap things up with a summary of what we have been through today. In our first section, we delved into understanding sincerity in a business context, highlighting that it's about conveying your thoughts, feelings, and intentions honestly and genuinely. This helps to build trust, the cornerstone of successful business relationships. In our second section, we discussed common English expressions used to express sincerity. We emphasized the need for using these expressions genuinely and sparingly to maintain their authenticity and impact. Then we moved on to the significance of verbal and non-verbal cues in conveying sincerity. Your tone of voice, your body language, and even the speed and volume at which you speak can greatly affect your message's sincerity. We then explored expressing sincerity in written communication, underscoring the importance of the right choice of words, clear sentence structure, and of course a balanced tone. And lastly, we examined cultural nuances and some common pitfalls to avoid when expressing sincerity in business English. We learned that understanding and respecting cultural differences is essential to effectively conveying sincerity across different business environments. Remember, sincerity is all about being genuine and true. It's not something that can be faked or forced. It comes from believing in what you say and do, and from respecting and valuing the people you're communicating with. As we said at the start of this episode, sincerity is a virtue, much admired in personal relationships, and it holds no less value in the realm of business. And that's all for today's episode of the Business English Podcast. We hope you found it insightful and helpful as you continue your journey to enhance your English communication skills in the business world. Remember, it's not just about mastering the language, it's about using it to build strong, sincere, and successful business relationships. So, until next time, keep it strictly business. You have been listening to the Business English Podcast. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and we'll see you next time.